Ian Wilson, Andrew Wilson, who's written, I think I've probably counted about 78 books in the last 40 years or so.
Right.
I thought you were going to say last 40 minutes.
Yeah. So good morning to both of you. Good morning, Mary Ann.
Good morning.
And good morning, Andrew.
Good morning.
We're going to talk about J.D. Vance. Will he be a vice president to remember? Can Keir Starmer do a deal with Europe on migration? And I'm afraid we're going to have to talk about ties because we've only been talking about it for 3 hours and you're still talking about it.
And Andrew Wilson is wearing an interest. Is that loud or is it quiet? It's something.
It's quite loud for 2024, I think.
Oh, sorry.
Where's it from?
Teal and black.
Good use of teal.
I never buy ties. My wife and daughter give me ties, which they always buy in charity shops. And this one is, I think it's Nina Ricci.
Oh, there we go. Get you. Yeah. So we're getting about. I feel it's a question about formality. How much formality should there be in the world? That's what's been our theme of our programme this morning. You can join in as ever, as you have been doing. The WhatsApp number is 0333 0032353. You can email Emma on studio@times.radio or text us 87222. Start your message with the word Times.
Now, J.D. Vance has the perfect CV, really, doesn't he, in terms of the American dream? Yale, Silicon Valley, the Marines, all on top of a family background. Tough enough to be a Netflix film. Actually, it really is a Netflix film, although we don't think a very good one. Donald Trump named him as his running mate and pick for vice president. And last night he took his chance to give a show-stealing speech at the Republican National Convention, which focused heavily on his difficult upbringing.
Our movement is about single moms like mine who struggled with money and addiction but never gave up. And I'm proud to say that tonight my mom is here, 10 years clean and sober. I love you, Mom.
And the crowd loved JD's mom as well, so much so that they chanted it. Mary Ann Sieghart, I suppose this is very much kind of what we expected. You know, we've heard about his book, Hillbilly Elegy. And so we kind of know a bit about his story already, and he was just fleshing that out, really. But what did you make of? Was there anything that stood out for you from his speech overnight?
Well, JD's mum actually tried to kill him in a car crash when he was a child, which he wrote about in Hillbilly Elegy, but not it didn't speak about in his speech last night. I mean, it's a very powerful backstory, isn't it? Even the fact that he comes from somewhere called Middletown, this notion of it being, you know, in the flyover part of America, in the middle of America, where the East and West Coast elites never go. He mentioned the Rust Belt states, which are, of course, the swing states that Trump needs to win if he's going to win the Electoral College. And it is an extraordinary, as you say, story of the American dream coming from, you know, a single alcoholic mother brought up by his grandmother, More, he calls her, who had 19 loaded handguns found when she died. He talked about God a lot, and I think God's playing quite a part in the Republican convention. Of course, this is a country in which 74% of people believe in God and 87% of Republicans. That's compared with only 27% of Brits. So God is a much more important part of politics in the US. And I think a lot of the delegates at the convention think that divine intervention saved Trump's life last week.
Yeah.
I mean, they literally think that. And J.D. Vance mentioned God, I think, quite a bit in his speech. He is an extraordinary candidate. On the plus side, he has, as I said, an incredible backstory. He's also very bright, very articulate, very plausible. I should think he will crush Kamala Harris in the VP debate if she's still VP by then, not the presidential candidate. On the minus side, though, he's only 39. He's only had 2 years experience as a senator. So he's very, very inexperienced. And of course, you know, Trump is also of advanced age and people are going to see him as a possible president, very young to be doing that. And also, you know, he described Trump as a Nazi, didn't he? Or proto-Nazi, and was, you know, one of the Never Trump brigade. So he's going to have some explaining to do. You know, is he just an opportunist who's seen which way the wind is blowing and moved from a Never Trump to Trump's own VP candidate?
Yeah. Andrew, I mean, it's a bit weird, really, but I think what we can draw from the conclusion we can draw that you can say anything about Donald Trump as long as you change your mind or
Well,
are very polite.
He changes his mind all the time. So, I mean, I don't see why his vice presidential candidate shouldn't change his mind as well. I mean, I think what we're overlooking here is the question of, imagine yourself a woman, even if you come from Middletown or its equivalent, having to make up your mind. Do you approve of what the Supreme Court has ruled about abortion? If the people who are affected by the abortion question are the poor, any rich person has always been able to get an abortion if they want to. And what the Supreme Court has done in many states of the United States now is to make it impossible for a poor woman who, for whatever reason, finds herself to be expecting a child and not able to cope with the situation, is in an absolutely impossible, intolerable position. And this is what the Republican Party is going to be saddled with, particularly because Vance makes a great deal, as you've already said, of being a practicing Roman Catholic under obedience to the American bishops who have been absolutely violently against President Biden, is also a Catholic, because they've excommunicated Biden. So this is, I think, the key question for the American voter. And although we may be sitting in London making all sorts of predictions and thoughts and hopes about America, its foreign policy, etc., if you're going into the ballot and having to vote and you are a poor woman in America, you would be crazy not to vote for the party that wants to reform the abortion law again.
But you say all that, but he's just given us, J.D. Vance, the story of his own mother, who was poor, who was working class, and who was a single mother. So
I know, but she might not have wanted. I mean, of course, we all rejoice in his existence, but she might not have wanted him to exist. But surely, most women listening to what I'm saying, however much they disapprove of abortion and however much they recognise any abortion is a tragedy, really, they would think it was their decision, not the decision of some very right-wing judge.
Mary Ann?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, J.D. Vance's grandmother, his Mormor, got pregnant with him when she was 13. And her then husband was only 16. So, I mean, it's really astonishing that... what I find so depressing is that I had thought that progress towards women's equality was a linear thing, that, you know, it was just getting better and better, rather slowly, and I'd like to speed it up. But I find it so depressing how quickly things can go backwards, very, very fast. And as Andrew says, that's what's happening in the US. And J.D. Vance himself said he wanted a nationwide ban on abortion. Now, he's rode back on that. To agree with Trump,
but he said it. And, you know, I'm repeating myself, but just imagine being an American voter. As it happens, I have a daughter who's an American voter. I cannot conceive of any woman wanting what the Supreme Court wanted, however much they believed in the Pope and the Roman Catholic religion.
Well, presumably there are lots of Republican women who do.
Well, some do, but I think when it comes to it, it's one thing saying you do, if you have the power to vote against it. And I think that people tremendously overlook the strength of feeling about this matter.
Just one other quick thing, and that's Ukraine, because we've spoken to you about this before. You know, there are other ramifications, not just domestic ones, as important as those are. He's no fan of sending money to Ukraine. He said before, I don't really care what goes on in Ukraine. That was a couple of years ago. He is an isolationist through and through. We know that is a popular view amongst some Americans. Yes. What do you make of that, of his approach?
Well, I mean, if you think of Trump as the next president and the Republicans, they will be more isolationist. But I don't think America can really draw back from the fact that it is the most powerful nation in NATO. And NATO is committed to the Ukraine in some shape or form. Of course, what everybody wants is peace in the Ukraine, and it could be, who knows, let's be optimistic for a change. It could be that by being a slightly more isolationist, slightly more doubtful about pouring money and weapons into the Ukraine crisis, and instead pouring ingenuity into a kind of diplomatic solution, it could be that's actually going to be a good thing.
Mary Ann?
Well, I don't think it'll be that good a thing for Ukraine, because I'm pretty sure that what Trump will do, he's already said on day one or day two, he will achieve peace in Ukraine. And what he actually says is, I mean, what he actually means is he will tell Zelensky, you've got to give up the parts of the country that Russia has already occupied.
Yes, but we all know in real life, as opposed to what we might dream of sitting in London, that there are large parts of what we call the Ukraine that are inhabited almost entirely by Russians and Russian speakers, have always been regarded as part of Russia. And however intolerable Putin is, and however bad the Russians are in this particular regard, there will have to be a peace conference at some point, and those territories which the Russians want will eventually be, as it were, given back to Russia. We know that's the case, and all we're doing by supporting the very anti-Putin line that's pursued at the moment by Biden and by the former Conservative government.
And the Labour government.
And now by the Labour government, is just killing more young people.
You've called it wicked,
cities.
Andrew. I mean, you actually do agree with JD Vance. You've said it's wicked to spend money in Ukraine
Yes, I
when
do.
we could be spending money on the country.
I do think that.
That's precisely the JD Vance
Yes,
position boiled down.
I do more or less take the JD Vance position about Ukraine.
Yeah.
Because I think it just makes the matter worse to think that there's a war that we, the West or NATO, could win. We could never win it. Russia is bound to win this conflict, and the sooner you could have a peace conference and stop people killing one another and destroying beautiful cities, the better.
Mary Ann, there's people who argue precisely the opposite, which is that if you let Putin win this, he'll go on, and therefore we have to find some way of winning this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that would just embolden him, and you only have to listen to leaders of the Baltic states and Poland to see how worried that they are about that. Yeah. And the vast majority of Ukrainians do not want to have the sort of solution that Andrew and JD Vance are suggesting.
The vast majority of pro-Western Ukrainians who speak Ukrainian, which isn't actually the vast majority of Ukrainians.
Quite a lot of people who speak Russian are not pro-Russian.
No, of course they're not.
Yeah.
Nobody. I mean, very, very few people in their heart of hearts are pro-Putin or what he's doing. He's an absolute monster. Nobody denies that. I'm just talking about something which would produce a peaceful, sensible solution.
Yeah, we still seem a very long way away from that, whatever the rhetoric on the subject is. Let's move on. On the front of the Times today, Keir Starmer will begin his mission to secure a new deal with Europe on migration today as he hosts a summit of European leaders. He's expected to have a private meeting with President Macron where it's thought they'll discuss an agreement to send back some small boat migrants in return for accepting a number of asylum seekers from Europe. Whether Macron has a mandate to make any negotiation at the minute is itself a separate question. Mary Ann, you've been following European politics for some time. This has always boiled down to a question is it politically acceptable in Britain to have a quota system with Europe, where we effectively say we'll send back some people who cross the channel in small boats, but in return we'll take some people from Europe as asylum seekers, and that will be a number, it will be a figure, it might even be a group of people we can't have very much say on. That might be a intellectual solution. Is it actually a politically possible solution?
I think there might be a way of selling it, because I think the suggestion is that we take people who are genuine asylum seekers, who have passed all the tests for asylum, in return for sending back those who are not genuine asylum seekers, but who are economic migrants. And also, I think a lot of the asylum seekers that we would be accepting from Europe would be children who have relatives here in the UK. So I think it's something that's sellable, actually. I think it's certainly worth a try.
Why would Europe agree to that? I mean, I guess why would Europe take back people who've been using people smugglers, who these young men predominantly who go on these boats? Why would France willingly take that back, do you think?
Well, there is already this Dublin Convention that says that asylum seekers should be sent back to the first safe country they've got to. And France is a perfectly safe country for asylum seekers. So France has already signed up to this convention.
But that's never worked. We were all signed up to that convention for years, and it was always honoured in the breach rather than the observance, wasn't it? No one actually did anything about it.
Well, that's true. But you asked why would they do it?
Yeah.
I just think, there are legal reasons for them to accept them back.
Are there moral reasons, Joe? Maybe the moral reasons. Are there politically pragmatic reasons why this could happen, Andrew?
Well, I think there are politically pragmatic reasons, and they're slightly different from the moral reasons, because in terms of what's practical, what we haven't answered by saying we're going to divide up economic migrants from real asylum seekers, what do you do? So, all these countries in Europe are perfectly safe for a migrant, whether they're asylum seekers or economic migrants. And it's the poorer countries, obviously Greece and Italy and southern Spain and so on, that receive the first brunt. So you could say they've got to stay on the Greek islands and in southern Italy. What do you do with all these people, whatever you label them, whether they're economic migrants, asylum seekers, what do you do with them if you've said we can't have them in France or Germany or England?
So the answer there is for every nation to gather together and agree a quota system.
Yes, but I mean, you still haven't answered what do you do with them when you've agreed you don't want them. Are you saying you've got to send them back?
Well, I think you have to take them. I think you have to agree a certain number to take them, though. That's
Well,
the point.
of course you... I mean, what I'm trying to suggest is I actually think the situation is totally out of control because of the whole system that's going on in the world of life in these poorer countries in sub-Saharan Africa being intolerable, climate change, etc., etc. There's going to be this everlasting drift through the world. And while I welcome what's going on, and I think we needed a change of government and we need a change of a discussion with Europe about what to do specifically with the poor people in the boats, the bigger question of what you do with world migration, we can't solve. We've just got to live with it in some strange kind of a way, in my opinion. I think it's sheer fantasy by the so-called right-wing parties to think that you can have zero immigration or anything of that kind.
That's interesting. I think there has. I feel over the last couple of years that perhaps there has been a shift in the kind of the language around this and the rhetoric. But we shall see. Now, listen, we have been talking about J.D. Vance, who gave a speech overnight. John Pienaar has a special show from 4 o'clock this afternoon on Times Radio. He's in Milwaukee at the Republican National Convention. And of course, he's going to look ahead to Donald Trump's appearance. He's appeared a few times but hasn't said anything. He's obviously saving his voice, isn't he?
You sent me the picture of some of his fans are wearing...
Yeah, the bandages on the ear.
They're all looking like Vincent van Gogh.
They're wearing vanity ear bandages. It's magnificent.
Those guys, honestly, they're crazy.
Is it a cult? Yes, it's a cult.
Right, Andrew, stay
Very
there.
Messiah-like, isn't it?
Very much so. Mary Ann and Andrew, stay there. We've still got a few things to talk about IVF and what to wear at work. They're going to talk about IVF now. I wonder, unless you're interested in IVF and it's not something that you are thinking of, you probably wouldn't know the chances of success of IVF for women in their late 30s. It is 26%, which is pretty low. For women in their 40s, it is 5%. The organisation that regulates IVF is warning that women are perhaps leaving it too late, although some women don't like that terminology, and I fully understand why. Because for the first time, the average age of women starting IVF treatment has passed 35. But how does that work with the difficulties women have earning money, finding somewhere to live when they're young, finding the right partner? You've been getting in touch about this. Just very quickly from Domenica. I had my much longed for son by IVF at 43. I overcame obstacles as life is something of a miracle. There's a lot of judgment out there still about IVF and sole parents, including the S word, selfish. I'm a conservative and conventional person and never thought I'd be a sole parent. People ought not to rush to judge women for delaying, in inverted commas. The reality is usually more complicated than that, and you can never know the last thing about any human heart. But one of you has said, Amanda, I'm not opposed to IVF per se, but I'm fundamentally opposed to it being available on the NHS. Why should the taxpayer fund it if you can have children by the natural method? That's all pretty loaded, isn't it? There are lots of things to consider. Mary Ann Sieghart, we need your wisdom on this, really, because I don't really know. What answers are we looking for here, really?
Well, I think I think we're looking for much more affordable childcare. One of the reasons why women are delaying having babies is because it is so damn expensive to have babies here in the UK. We're the most expensive nation in the developed world for childcare, which takes up more than half of the average median income here in the UK, compared with less than 5% in Germany and Austria. And so, if you are a young couple who have already really stretched themselves to pay rent or to buy somewhere to live, and you are facing the prospect of having children, you simply can't afford to have children until you're earning a bit more. Now, that might be fine for the father because he will remain fertile, until his 70s. It's not okay for the mother whose fertility drops off sharply after the age of 35. So I really feel for these women who are in such a cost of living squeeze and can't afford to have children at a time when they're most fertile.
Andrew, what do you think? There are different ways of looking at it. There's the expense, which is perhaps deterring couples and women, and then on the other side there's IVF with its kind of the shrinking nature of it as well, because you have to depends where you live, what age you are, you might have to fund it yourself. Should we be looking at IVF or should we be looking at childcare?
It depends who we are. I mean, I'm a man. I'm an old man. I've had 3 children, 6 grandchildren. So, I mean, I'm in no way to speak to the person you read out rather movingly, who said she'd had her baby at 43. And of course she loves her son. And I'm not going to judge anybody for wanting a baby. At the same time, as a society, if you're thinking of the politicians spending money on the free childcare that would be necessary to do what Mary Ann says we all need, if we're going to have young women being able to afford to have babies, they're never going to do that, the politicians. So it is actually going to be a problem for the better off.
But the point is,
if you're not better off, then this isn't going to be a problem because you're not going to be able to dream of having a baby.
But the point here, I suppose, is a wider demographic point, isn't there? That if women are having babies later and their chances of having babies are less, then that also affects the population, and we already know that's
of course
a
it does.
problem.
We are an aging population, and the only alternative to not having, I mean, many people listening or thinking about this problem would say, let's go down a kind of old-fashioned Soviet model, which I would rather favour myself, of encouraging young women to have babies and having free state nurseries for everybody. But that's never going to happen because it's so expensive. Much cheaper is to import labour. And that's what we're going to do. So we'll have an ageing population of people like me, doddering and drooling away. And the people who are actually doing anything will all be immigrants. That's fine as far as I'm concerned, but that is the decision politicians have already made decades ago.
Mary Ann, you want to say something?
Yes, subsidising childcare does pay for itself in the long term because first of all, it enables mothers to go back to work more easily, and that boosts the economy. And secondly, it means that you've got a bigger working age population in the future to be able to subsidise the drooling Andrew Mary Ann's of this world.
No, of course, I agree with you. It's just that in the short term, it's going to be so expensive that the taxpayer isn't going to want to do it, and politicians will be frightened of it.
There's also the point, Mary Ann, that in countries where they do that, there's still a very low birth rate. So in Sweden and Scandinavian countries where there is much better childcare, there is still a very low birth rate. So that is clearly part of it, but it's not the only part of it. We've had this text from someone who wants to be anonymous, and this is the general issue of work. And the great equality in work of women and men getting more and more equal is a good thing, but this is the consequence that people have to deal with. She says this: we have to make a choice as a woman. Do we get the amazing job we want or the baby and the family? Barely anyone has both unless they're very wealthy. You need a nanny, family and your own home to make it even half possible. That's out of reach for most, no matter how good your job is. I chose to give my work everything, and now I'm 36. Work basically all hours, and people constantly raise an eyebrow and ask if I'm happy I won't ever have children. I suspect most have no idea how awful that feels because they think I wanted a good job more. But I didn't choose not to have a family. I chose work as hard as I could in the hope I could one day have both. It's just basically nobody does unless you're a bloke. That's the new glass ceiling.
I think that's a very, very good message. And it's easy to sit here if you're a man, particularly if you're an old man, and not realise how true that is for every single woman going into the workplace, and that we have trained little girls, and quite rightly, and young women to think that they should have the same opportunities as men, but of course they don't have, because they are the ones in the end who've got to make the decision to have the baby, and when do they have it?
Mary Ann, just draw a final point on this. I will ask a question about ties very briefly at the end, but do you have anything else you want to say on this? Because it's such an important issue. I don't think we've necessarily stumbled across a solution.
I don't think we have, but I think that employers need to rethink their attitudes to parenthood and to allow fathers as much paid parental leave as mothers, so that mothers aren't bearing a disproportionate burden of childcare. And that actually levels the playing field at work as well as at home. So, I mean, that would be my suggestion.
Let's talk about ties very briefly and formality. Scruffiness. Is scruffiness a problem, Mary? I'm going to talk to Andrew in a moment because he's beautifully dressed, elegantly dressed. Do ties matter, Mary Ann? Are you a modernist that actually it's time to get rid of them, or do you think it's something worth clinging on to?
I mean, I would absolutely hate to have something strangling me around my neck every day. I really feel for men who have to have their top button done up and then basically a rope tied around it. It must be incredibly uncomfortable. And, men can look very smart in an open neck shirt and a suit. I absolutely don't see why men have to wear ties anymore. I know in the House of Commons, it was said under John Bercow that people should wear business-like attire. Now, I sit on several boards, and on very few of them do any of the men wear ties. They wear suits or jackets and they look smart. But in business, men very rarely wear ties anymore.
What about T-shirts, Mary Ann? That's what I'm interested in. We've got rid of ties, then it's shirts, open
and then
shirts.
trousers. Why not shorts?
Why not? I'm with you
Bare
on that.
feet.
Bare feet. What is it? T-shirt. Have you ever sat on a board with people in T-shirts, Mary Ann?
I've occasionally seen a man with a T-shirt under a jacket. Yeah,
I think that's good.
The thing is about something like the House of Commons or a business meeting, it's a formality. And if you're wearing a kind of uniform, it doesn't matter what it is. I totally agree with Mary Ann about ties if you don't want to wear a tie. But to be smart imposes a kind of discipline on you, and you think, I'm not just sitting at home having a chat about politics. I've been elected to represent the people of Scunthorpe. I've got to wear smarter
But why?
clothes.
Can't you have the intellectual mobility to just make that decision yourself?
Because we're physical beings. We're not just intellectual beings. And so changing your clothes to do something puts you in a different mood, and it makes you more serious.
Chris says, Andrew taught me English for a year.
Oh, bless you. Bless
a
you,
delight,
Chris.
he says, during which time he wore almost archetypal teacher, grey suit, shirt, tie, etc. But perhaps because of being enviably slim, he looked terribly elegant. Later, he was feted by the media as a young fogey. So he's the answer. Find out what suits you and wear it.
I agree
Don't
with
let
it.
people
Can I
tell
just
you.
say one thing to Mary Ann about men? She's been very flattering about men, but what she doesn't notice, because she's obviously so fond of men, is that after the age of about 40, men's necks and throats become absolutely revolting, and throughout fashion history.
I'm 44, Andrew.
Throughout fashion history, I know, but you've got a beard.
Yeah.
But throughout human history, men have either grown beards or they've worn cravats and ruffs and all sorts of things to hide the fact that their necks are revolting.
Interesting. You poor guys.
I think Stig looks very fetching in his black T-shirt today, by the way.
Bless your heart, Mary Ann.
It's one of his better ones,
No,
I
but
have to say.
he's got a beard. You can't see the
Okay, let's not go down the beard path. Okay,
That's another debate, isn't it?
It is, and we've had it, and we'll have it again. Andrew, thank you very much, Andrew Wilson, and also Mary Ann Sieghart. Thank you very much. There are so many texts coming in about ties, but also on IVF, and we haven't really reflected that many from men who've gone through it. And I just want to read this one out from Sebastian. I have a 2-year-old child through IVF, and it was a horrible experience. People massively overestimate the chances of success and underestimate the importance of the male sperm in the process. Also, once you start, it's very hard to stop or avoid additional costs. We spent nearly £100,000 on ours. My goodness. Because every time the quack suggests trying X or Y, why wouldn't you give it a go? So you're sucked in. People should think very carefully about relying on it, says Sebastian.